All right, hello, and welcome back to Real Seekers. I'm your host, Dale, the Real Seeker. And all right, hello, and welcome back to Real Seekers. I'm your host, Dale, the Real Seeker. And I'm moving on with my Shroud's Historicity solo series, moving on to the next period from 501 to 1000 AD for part 2C. But before I do that, some of the fans reached out and you guys said that my last show covering the period from 30 to 500 AD was a little bit too long at 4.5 hours. So I want to make a condensed, very quick summary of that episode for you guys. Okay, so on the Pro-Shroud side, there was the image of Edessa hypothesis, which basically during our period meant that it revolves around the King Abgar legend, saying that it went from Jerusalem to Edessa, and sometime before 50 AD, and sometime or after 57 AD, when the second of Abgar V's sons, Manu VI, who was an evil ancient pagan, took over and started persecuting innocent Christians. Some hero hid the Shroud of Turin, and in the Edessan wall. In the Edessan wall, it was lost until after 500 AD. Image of God incarnate hypothesis during our relevant period. Instead of going to Edessa, it went to the more probable site of Antioch, the Gentile Christian capital, and a city known to be associated with the Passion relics. And it was there under the care of the Bishop of Antioch till about 362 AD, when it was finally hidden during a pagan persecution in the Gate of the Cherubim in Antioch's wall. It was lost and forgotten about for 175 years until the 6th century. Okay, the key data and facts from last episode, we had the Galatians 3:1 text, 1 Clement chapter 2, verse 1, Eusebius and Doctrine of Addai texts, the inscription of Abbasaris, the Book of the Popes, and various archaeological evidences that prove Abgar VIII was converted to Christianity, not Abgar V. We had the Gospel of the Hebrews, as well as a St. Nina text, or St. Nino text, Hymn of the Pearl, talking about a double-imaged shroud, and the Good Shepherd fresco, that should say Sermon on the Mount fresco, as well as other shroud-like Jesus images from the late 4th into the early 5th centuries, the Sermon of Athanasius text, and the Catechese texts. So to summarize these things, Galatians 3:1 says that, and written in the 40s AD, says that the Galatians saw the shroud images aka they saw Christ crucified, and they was publicly portrayed as such before their very eyes. That means they must have probably saw the Shroud of Turin images. 1 Clement chapter 2, verse 1, written in 95 AD, confirms this in the late 1st century with respect to the Corinthians, who before their eyes Christ's suffering was publicly portrayed to them too. Now, in terms of the discipline of the secret, I agree with a proto-discipline of the secret in the 1st century, where they hid something like the Shroud of Turin from pagans and persecuting Jews and iconoclast Christians and stuff like that. I don't think that it's the proper discipline of the secret from the later centuries, because that's more about the elites, the bishops, hiding things from the lay level Christians and the immature Christians or catechumens and stuff like that. So that's a later tradition. But there is a proto-discipline of the secret that I think would have applied. They would have hidden the shroud from the pagans and iconoclastic Jews and early heretic Christians. In terms of the Gospel of the Hebrews and the St. Nino texts, the Gospel of the Hebrews in the 2nd century, around the 140 AD, does talk about the shroud being preserved, kept, and remembered by the servant, being given to the servant of the priest by Jesus, whoever that is. Most people say the Apostle Peter. And St. Nino in the 4th century confirms this, that eventually Peter got the shroud. Now, from the mid-2nd century to the 3rd century AD, we have King Abgar, the first king of Edessa to convert to Christianity, according to secular historians. That's based on a total lack of any expected historical and archaeological evidence for King Abgar V's conversion until the 4th or 5th centuries with that Eusebius and Doctrine of Abgar legend texts. Now, it's important to note that we would expect there to be some archaeological remnants of a Christian conversion for King Abgar V if it happened back in the first century, mid-first century. And they were Christians for something like over 2 decades or something like that, at least. There would be preserved some Christian archaeological proof, but there's nothing. And this proves that King Abgar VIII was the first Christian, because we do have proof for him. We have the Chronicle of Edessa that records in 201 AD a flood that took place and destroyed many buildings, including the nave of a church of the Christians. A church of the Christians, not in home churches like they were back in the Apostles' Day. No, they're just out and out having churches. Incredible. This proves that Christianity was out in the open in Edessa. There are Christian crosses depicted on the headdress of King Abgar VIII on his joint coin with the Emperor Commodus, dating back before 192 AD. And there are Christian crosses found on lion fountains dating during the reign of King Abgar in the late 2nd century AD. Additionally, we have the Book of Popes, or the Liber Pontificalis, that says that Abgar VIII reached out to Pope Eleutherius to invite papal emissaries to come to Edessa, baptize him, and preach the gospel message. Now, originally, this was thought to be about the King of Britain, but in 1904, all historians changed their mind and realized this is actually talking about King Abgar VIII. And Jack Marquardt kind of covers how in 1904 they uncovered this mystery or this misunderstanding, because, quote unquote, as written, however, this entry actually recited that Eleutherius had received a letter from Lucio Britannia Regi, Lucius, King of Britain. Oops. However, we know it is historically impossible that Lucius, the King of Britain, would have asked, because Britain was already a part of the Roman Empire during this time, whereas Edessa was not. And scholar Harnack in 1904, he knew that Abgar the Great's full name was Lucius Elias Septimus Magus Abgarus VIII. And he ruled from Edessa's citadel called the quote-unquote Britio Edessinorium. So it's been historically proven by all secular scholars and historians today that this mention in the Book of Popes is talking about Abgar VIII, not the King of Britain. And he's reaching out to this Pope Eleutherius to send papal envoys, come through ancient Antioch, come to me, baptize me, and share the gospel message and that sort of thing. And it's postulated by Jack Marquardt that, well, as they passed through Antioch, perhaps remarking this remarkable, unique occasion, for the first time in all of human history, a king has become a Christian. And because Commodus was partial to Christianity and didn't persecute, there was this opportunity to bring the shroud to show King Abgar VIII in celebration of his conversion. Important to note here is that Edessa was, his secular historians say Edessa was converted to Christianity in 2 phases. The first, during King Abgar VIII's reign, where it was kind of synchronistic with the pagan predecessors and stuff, so they didn't know all the facts and stuff, but they were definitely going for Christianity. And the second phase in the 3rd century, where the proper Bible-believing Christians came and said, look, you guys got to mature up, get mature and read your Bibles and do things the proper biblical way. And they were further Christianized in the 3rd century. Okay, another piece of evidence here is the inscription of Abercius, and this attests to the fact that of the baptism of King Abgar VIII, and it also speaks in this inscription of a thing called a quote-unquote fish of exceeding great size and perfect. And so this is supposedly a shroud images reference, because according to Jack, Jesus' fish, the fish symbol does represent Jesus and the Eucharist, but it's always in the palm of your hands. It's little fish or small fish. Now, I looked this up, and this is actually not true. The big fish does refer to Jesus in the ancient early Christian church fathers, and so it's probably the secular historians are probably correct that the exceeding great fish of size, the fish of exceeding great size and perfection is Jesus, not shroud images here. So I don't believe this is a reference to the shroud. And we have things from Augustine talking about the big Jesus as the big fish, Clement of Alexandria, and even Tertullian, who dates to 220 AD, around the same time as this inscription of Abersius was written. And he says, quote unquote, happy is our sacrament of water in that by washing away the sins of our early blindness, we are set free and admitted into eternal life. But we, little fishes, after the example of our big fish, Jesus Christ, are born in water, nor have we safety in any other way than by permanently abiding in water. And this is something that, us as Christians being referred to as little fishes and Jesus as the big honcho, the big fish, and kind of consistent with Jonah and the whale and that sort of thing, Jonah and the big fish. This is kind of proven that, there's nothing shroud related, provably, according to this inscription of Abersius. What about the Sermon on the Mount fresco in the Roman catacombs? Now, Jack, in the show, I presented this came from the early 3rd century, meaning, it was a memory, based on a memory of King Abgar VIII seeing the Shroud Man. And they first portray him with a beard and long shoulder-length hair, just like the Shroud of Turin Man. Now, unfortunately, there is a dispute about the dates. Most people scholars date this late 3rd century or even early 4th century. And because of that, I'm not sure that this can be used as proof to establish a direct link with King Abgar VIII, and he saw the shroud. I believe that, by the way. I agree with Jack. I think that King Abgar VIII was the first convert to Christianity, and I think the Abgar legends in later texts like Eusebius and the Doctrine of Addai are allegorical discipline of the secrets and or garbled memories of the shroud being shown to King Abgar VIII, perhaps. That makes sense to me. Okay. Next, we have the Hymn of the Pearl. Again, dates to about 220 AD, definitely before 226 AD when the Sassanid Persian Empire took over, because this reflects the former Parthian Persian Empire. Now, Hugh Ferry gives his own skeptical attack. This basically, Jack says, it refers to mirror images and double images of the shroud, just like the Shroud of Turin, frontal and dorsal images of the full-length Jesus Christ. Now, unfortunately, this is an allegorical text, and I think it's clear. It talks about this golden robe along with a purple tiara or toga in the beginning before Jesus comes down to earth, and afterwards he's reclothed in it. Now, this robe is what Jesus sees his reflection in, and supposedly is the Shroud of Turin and referencing the shroud images. But I think that's probably incorrect. Now that I've read the entire Hymn of the Pearl, I don't think that's what's going on. I mean, it's possible, it's plausible, but the shroud image interpretation is improbable, I would say. And again, if you just read the story, again, it is allegory, but it seems like it is, so Hugh Ferry interprets this as the allegory for the incarnation. The robe and purple toga represent Jesus giving up his divine attributes and becoming human. And then he takes off his robes as clothes on earth, and he forgets who he is. And that, and then a couple people come up to him and say, hey, remember who you are, and you've got to capture this pearl from Satan. The pearl from Satan represents Jesus' atoning death, grabbing and ransoming the Christians, the pearls, from the clutches of the satanic serpent. And he saves us through his death and then ultimately resurrection. And then he goes up to heaven, takes off his his earthly dirty clothes, goes up to the heavens and sees his golden robes again and the purple toga, and puts them on, and he's back to being great, grand, and groovy. Because it's allegory, there are multiple ways to interpret this. And I would just say that I don't see any provable link that this is talking about shroud images. It's definitely not double shroud images, because that part, as I showed the last show, is Jesus talking about the two others telling him to remember who he is, they saw themselves reflected in their glory. So it seems to be some kind of allegory about Jesus regaining his glory again and seeing himself reflected gloriously in the robes, and then he puts it on, clothing himself in the glory that he lost when he became incarnate and came to earth. So I don't think the hymn of the pearl, provably on a balance of probabilities, is speaking about the shroud images as the pro-shroud side, like Jack Marquardt likes to say, or likes to argue and that sort of thing, or insinuate, whatever he does. And think about it. Even if you're an Image of Edessa fan, the Hymn of the Pearl would have been a contradiction, because supposedly the shroud is hidden in an Edessan wall. So if here we are in 220 AD, and the Hymn of the Pearl is speaking about shroud images seen by King Abgar VIII, well, that contradicts the Image of Edessa theory based on the Abgar legend, because it's in the late 2nd century and into the early 3rd century, the shroud images are long since hidden and forgotten about in the walls of Edessa. So I just wanted to make that clear, that there is a contradiction here if you take the pro-shroud side, pro-shroud opinion, that this is referring to shroud images there. Okay, looking at the Image of Edessa hypothesis, our first main text is Eusebius's Abgar legend. We have to say that Eusebius's account of the Abgar legend, written in the early 4th century, is based directly on copying other Edessan archives or written records, probably an earlier proto-version of the doctrine of Adai. And it only mentions King Abgar V seeing a wonderful vision in or on the face of the disciple Adai. So this is a unique and mysterious vision, but it's probably not a cryptic or veiled reference to the folded shroud's facial image, because no one else saw the vision at all. And I don't think that would be an accurate description of someone seeing shroud images, even if they are diffuse images. So other interpretations seem equally or more likely to be true. It's probably the case that the wonderful vision is referring to some kind of theophany type or transfiguration like vision. But it is odd. Why is it in or on the face of Adai? I don't know exactly what they're talking about. The doctrine of Adai, Abgar legend. So this, if it's in the proto version, it predates 242 AD because it supposedly comes from the Edessan archives. But most scholars will place it around 400 AD, when the text as we have it today, the version we have of the doctrine of Adai and the Abgar legend today, dates from. Now, Eusebius, it refers to the wonderful vision, just like the Eusebius account does. So it suffers the same problems. A wonderful vision is not a seeing shroud images, probably not. And it seems rather that this is referring more to the Abgar VIII seeing the shroud images, if anything, because Abgar VIII, it refers to people that were contemporary with Abgar VIII, not Abgar V. So this is kind of a hint that the doctrine of Adai and Eusebius Abgar legend is allegorical in nature. It's talking about Abgar VIII's conversion and putting it in the context of Abgar V's time. But it mentions people only from the 2nd century, the Bishop of Serapion of Antioch, Bishop Paulet of Edessa, etc. It also mentions Abgar's son, Manu. Now, that also applies to Abgar V because he had two sons named Manu, Manu V and Manu VI. But nonetheless, Abgar VIII, his son, was Manu as well. So it fits both on that front. But nonetheless, there are these historically known figures that date from the late 2nd century associated with this Abgar legend. Why would that be? Well, it's because the author's saying, hint, this isn't really about Abgar V. That's just an allegory for the conversion of Abgar VIII, but we have to keep that a secret because the pagan emperor Septimus Severus has taken over and he's back to persecuting Christians. The golden age of peace under Commodus is over with. Now, additionally, this text records a painted image of Jesus's face as well, and it's claimed this might be a possible garbled memory or a veiled reference to the shroud images. However, John Loken says, quote unquote, we simply do not know whether the earlier proto-doctrine of Adai source document contained the painting scene, because Eusebius, the earliest definite and datable witness, does not recount or mention a painting at all, just the wonderful vision. The whole passage is intriguing and seems to be consistent with the Shroud of Turin in at least 4 ways. So the painting is said to be of the real Jesus, not based on a memory of him. Hanan was observing, or Ananias was observing Jesus in Jerusalem, where he painted this, not elsewhere. And it was done shortly before his crucifixion. So it's associated with his death and resurrection. And most importantly, it says that the painting was painted in choice paints. And John Loken says this might be a mysterious way of saying, well, the body images are diffuse on the Shroud of Turin. So maybe choice paints means it's not painted, but it's image diffuseness on the body images. Now, unfortunately, there's various translations for choice paints here. You have choice pigments. You also have Phillips saying that it's the paints. By choice paints, it means it's an oily substance that is being referred to here. Other translations say it's about the choice colors. So it's only a monochrome or monotone image. It's not multicolored painted image. That would fit the Shroud too. But George Kirez is a Syriac specialist, and he says the word refers to the actual paint material, but it could be somewhat ambiguous. So there's a question here of what's meant. Also, Shroud skeptics stress the obvious, that this only refers to a painting and nothing more. So, yeah, that's interesting, even though it seems rather odd that a unique portrait of Jesus was brought to Edessa. If there was nothing physically available in Edessa, no actual picture or painting, what on earth is this talking about? So I agree with John Loken that it is interesting that there is an image being associated with Edessa, and it's a rather unique painting or a choice painting of some sort. However, again, remember that painting scene is not in the earlier account in Eusebius and cannot be provably dated back to that time, to the proto-doctrine of Adi text that Eusebius was using. So some researchers think it was the painting is just a later legendary embellishment, perhaps inspired in the 3rd century with the paintings of Mani, who his disciples of Mani were going around in their missionary efforts. They were using portraits of Mani to evangelize people to Manichaeism. However, John is quick to point out none of Mani's portraits were said to be faint or hard to see, as seems suggested by Abgar's vision. But remember, that part is a reference to the wonderful vision, not the painting. So I think it's problematic for John to associate this as proof of talking about image diffuseness. This isn't about the painting. It's saying that the wonderful vision was unseeable by others. We've already discovered the wonderful vision very probably is not a reference to Shroud images and or a painting or a portrait of any kind. They seem to be separate. Now, taking the vision and the painting together, like Jack Markwart does and John Loken suggests, maybe they're not mutually exclusive. Maybe it's possible that both the painting and the wonderful vision are both referring to Shroud images. And they're not mutually exclusive, right? But someone might ask, well, isn't that redundant? Why just have the one, right? Why would you have the two? And I think this point from the Shroud skeptic works. I don't think anyone would purposefully put contradictory. For example, the painting was only made while Jesus was alive. How could that be allegory for the Shroud or a veiled reference? The Shroud, which only covered Jesus after he was dead and before he rose from the dead. They don't fit. They're contradictory. They don't match up. And it would be redundant. Just stick with one or the other. You don't need both, especially in these contradictory descriptions. That's why I think it's improbable that this is the case. But John Loken does say, well, quote unquote, well, perhaps the scenes were envisioned at different dates and then added to the Abgar story many years apart from each other, each one accepted for its own special charm as possible allusions to the Shroud, Thus, they are actually mutually reinforcing, not contradictory to each other. And this happens all the time. Legends come up in different versions, and over time they become amalgamated into one giant legend. I mean, just look at Santa Claus and Rudolph and all this stuff. So, yeah, I think that this is very plausible. I still think it's improbable to be the case here, just given what the texts actually say, and that's what I have to use to judge. I think the mutually reinforcing shroud image interpretation is an improbable interpretation. The Sermon of Athanasius and the Catechese text. These are Jack Markworth's texts that he used to support the image of God incarnate. So Athanasius' sermon, unfortunately, it's doubtful whether it was written by Athanasius or somebody else as late as 787 by Bishop Peter of Nicomedia, who first mentions it in history, about the image of Christ in Beirut during the fourth session of the Seventh Ecumenical Council, otherwise known as the Second Council of Nicaea. It could have been written way after 500 AD, and that dating issue is a real problem. Some people try to argue, well, it fits the milieu of Athanasius' time. Well, it also fits the iconoclastic times of 787 AD as well, or any time between that. So we don't really know when this text was written or first spoken. In the Sermon of Athanasius, it clearly speaks of a quote-unquote, a certain Christian had hired a chamber, and while living there, he had placed opposite his bed a painting or picture of the Lord Jesus Christ. It was painted on a tablet of boards and contained the image of our Lord and Savior at full length. So this is incredible. On a tablet of boards, again, this seems to be talking about not shroud images folded up into a facial image and then put on a board or placard like Ian Wilson wanted to say with the image of Edessa theory, where he just posits this happening back in the first century. The Sermon of Athanasius to say maybe this was done in Antioch instead, and that's why we have a record of this painted image on a tablet of boards being taken from Judea to Syria and remaining in Syria, not Edessa, to this day. There's no proof that this is about shroud images. And again, given just what's on the text, I have to say it's probably not. Definitely not given a literal reading. Even with it taking into account the discipline of the secrets, or in this later period where it's more about catechumens rather than pagans and stuff. Well, no, it could have been about pagans in this time and stuff, but even the proto-discipline of the secret then, even if that was still in full effect, I don't see why you would describe it being painted on a tablet of boards. This really seems to me to say it's probably speaking about a literal painting, not shroud images in some kind of veiled or cryptic reference. So as to the Catechese text written around 390 AD, this talks about by Bishop Theodore of Mopsuestia. This is totally irrelevant and a failure too, because it's speaking of the Eucharistic bread representing the figure of the literal body of Jesus. This is an equally probable, if not more likely, interpretation of this text compared to saying, well, no, it's an esoteric mention of shroud images. It's the figure of Jesus's images on the shroud. That's what the bread is meant to represent when we place it on the sepulchre linens placed on the altar. No, I think that works better saying, no, this is representing his literal body being placed in the shroud. So I don't think this can be used, Catechese text can be used to prove anything either. Okay, what about the Jesus portraits from the mid to late 4th century into the early 5th century? We finally start getting a mini limited explosion of shroud-like Jesuses, long hair, bearded images, and Marinelli goes through quite a bunch of them and stuff like that. But it's not until the 3rd century that we get our first look at that, and then into the mid to late 4th century. However, there are images. Manuela Marinelli has shown bearded long hair images even in the early 4th century and perhaps in the late 5th century as well. So I'm not sure that there is this established temporary explosion. It looks like more like, as the Shroud skeptics say, a natural development due to cultural or Sitzum-Leben reasons, life situation reasons, that there started to be the shift in some people drawing him with a beard representing certain other things, and other people sticking with the Greco-Roman youthful beardless short hair Jesus that represented his youth and eternity, whereas with the beard and stuff they started focusing more on his humanity and him and being a man and stuff like that. And yeah, I'm not sure we have to rely. There's equally probable, even perhaps more, I would say equally probable explanations for these portraits that are coming out with a bearded, long-haired Jesus. I mean, for example, we have portraits of Jesus with a beard, but yet different types of beards, or a beard but short hair. So yeah, I don't know what to make of this. I don't think this proves that they must have all seen the Shroud images from 357 to 362 AD, as Jack Marquardt says, and that's why there was this explosion, and then it faded off and people started forgetting again. I think that's equally likely given the data. Okay, that makes sense. But I can see the Shroud skeptics side equally on that front. And I don't want to press too much on the basis of these artworks. So yeah, that's it for the show. I hope you guys enjoyed. That's my recap for Some of Your Show Part 2B. So this will be Part 2B2. And it's only half an hour. Awesome. 4.5 hours condensed into 30 minutes for you. I hope you Shroud fans are happy with how I managed to condense my work into that and organize it there. Next time will be a longer show. It'll be Part 2C. And that's where I'm going to start getting into the higher quality evidence from the 6th century onwards, starting from 501 AD up to the year 1000 AD. And this is where we start getting a lot more texts, dozens upon dozens, I would say, of texts mentioning Shroud images or cloths with images, or the image of Odessa specifically, or the image of God incarnate specifically. So this is going to be by far the most interesting period and the most in-depth involved period. So look out for that show next time. All right, have a great week, everybody, and look forward to my Reason and Theology show later this week.